So today I'm talking on Zoom with Hisham Ayoub. Now, I met Hisham on Instagram. So I always say Instagram is one of the best rare book communities on the web. So if not on IG, you can meet plenty of people there. And certainly I'll post both of our Instagram handles so you can follow us. And we've been, good friends ever since we've met. Hisham hails from Texas, and that's I guess, the state that Elon Musk put on the map. And I asked him to Zoom with me because I think Hisham is one of the best examples of what a young, dedicated collector can do in the rare book world, starting from scratch, building up an interesting collection. So I think he's really an inspiration for a lot of people who want to get into collecting in a specific field. So Hisham collects in the field of dentistry. And most people might not be immediately attracted to dentistry as a collecting field, but it's actually, I think personally, quite fascinating because, like an octopus, it has many legs going out there. Of course, immediately you think about the history of medicine, but you think of things like, the development of anesthesia, which was such a breakthrough development, in the history of mankind. And also it has other branches into everything from anthropology and paleontology, because really the history of teeth and the study of teeth is really, one of the ways we study the history of humankind. A man's got to eat, so there's plenty of evidence of teeth before us in history. So, Hisham, why don't we start off? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you for that great introduction. I've been really a book collector since maybe the age of 6 or 7. I remember I was always a reader, an introvert, and I used to be what people used to call me a book snob, where if a book gets a creased corner, I would get rid of it, even at a young age. I used to collect Agatha Christie paperbacks and Stephen King paperbacks later on in my early teens. So there was definitely this kind of hoarding, collecting bug early on. I'm Lebanese background. I was raised in the Middle East until the age of 10. I moved to Canada. So I'm a Canadian citizen since the age of 10. And moved to the US, to Florida for dental school. It was around then that my collecting started kind of veering towards dentistry per se, for obvious reasons. I was in the world and immersed in the world of dentistry at the time. And about maybe 11 years ago, moved to Dallas for work reasons. And here I am. So yes, I currently hail from Texas, but I'm not originally Texan. But this is where I find myself now.
Now, you're one of those rare breeds of people who, like years ago, a doctor would collect in his field. And I feel like a lot of those collectors have, really stopped collecting in their areas of interest sometimes, at least their professional areas of interest. They certainly collect, first editions and literature or things like that. But what really started you? So you're working as a dentist. And what made you decide this is where I want to collect? What was the first book you purchased that really was the trigger?
So this is interesting because it was around dental school, maybe the second year of dental school. At that time, I used to collect science in general. And I had a couple of first editions of James Watson's Double Helix, signed personally by him. And definitely regret it now, but I did trade those for a box of 19th century dental books. As a financial position, I don't think that was great, but as more of a passion angle to it, it was definitely something that started me off down this road where it was maybe about 8 or 10 books, and it kind of helped me dive headfirst into the world of dental medicine, not only as a collecting hobby, but more as a historian. I started reading more about the history of my field, and you're right at the beginning, as what I find it fascinating about dentistry, and at least the history of it, is that it's very closely tied to medicine. As they say, the mouth is the gateway to the soul, or to our inner body, as the ancients used to say. So this is a window to medicine, I feel. whenever you're talking about oral and dental health.
So what was the actual first book in your field?
Uh,
You traded them for a box of 19th century dentistry.
it definitely was a box of 7 or 8 of them, and I would have to say there was one that was a James Bond, not James Bond, sorry, Thomas E. Bond. He was it was a pretty important textbook in the first school of dentistry, which was in Baltimore. I think that was dated 1850 or 1851, if I'm not mistaken. It went on to be published in three editions. There's a few others, Arthur Smith's, for example, um, just general dental knowledge, dental textbooks. So it was really 7 or 8 of them together in a box, and a lot of them were mid 19th century, early important textbooks in the teaching and education of dentistry.
So you started to get a few together. Now, did you decide there was going to be a scope for your collection or anything in the field related to dentistry?
My scope wasn't specifically broken into the subspecialties of dentistry per se. I know some collectors might want to collect the history of implantology, for example, or around that route. I was more of a wholesale collector. I wanted to get everything about the history of dentistry, but I did kind of limit it in a time period, which is pre 1900 as much as possible. Now, there are, of course, some important, notable books that were published after 1900, and they stand still prominent in the history of dentistry. But I would say 99% of my important collection is pre 1900 by design.
Well, a lot of, I guess, of the pre-1900 books, besides being interesting in the field, are also objects of art in their own way. So I know you, and I know you appreciate the art aspect to the printing and the object. So how you so you're starting out as a general collector, you're getting these together. Where did you go source your books?
Um, Really, I would consider myself a new generation collector, which is, I would say, 95% of my purchases were done online. I know now this might not strike young viewers of this interview as something that's a wow factor. But I mean, if you go back 20 years ago, that would be something considerable to say 95% of your collection is basically sight unseen just through photos. But it was really just years of participating in auctions myself online live, and also making networks with dealers such as yourself and becoming close ties and close allies in my collecting. So maybe hardly, I would say 5%, maximum 10% maybe. On my travels, I would visit dealers in their shops, but even then, it's not one of those explore and discover something in a bookshop. I would go there on purpose because I knew they had that certain copy, and I would go see it.
One of the things I like to ask collectors, and I found this personally from dealing in books, but even before I was dealing, of course, like you, I was accumulating and collecting things. And when I was a graduate student originally in computer science, I was, a professor of mine came over my shoulder and he said, "Don't work too hard on that program because it's going to affect the rest of your life. Like you're going to lead this very rigid life. It's going to bleed over into everything else." But how has interacting with old books and collecting them enriched your life, not just culturally but professionally?
Professionally, I mean, that's I guess the undercurrent of my purpose here. So, of course, the first purpose, admittedly, I will be self-serving. I love collecting. I love owning. It brings me happiness. But at the same time, I wanted the younger generation of dentists who, at least from my personal view, do not appreciate the history of our profession enough. And I'm currently doing my master's in the history of medicine at Johns Hopkins, part-time and remotely, and I'm working on my master thesis. And part of my focus on my thesis is the humanitarian aspect or the humane aspect of medicine, which dentistry now, for what it's worth, has, let's admit, a bad rap in public image. And this, I think, to me, diving headfirst and deeply into the history of my profession and see where we come from, it adds almost like a family tree of it gives me a little bit of pride of where we were and where we are, and it would kind of helps that translate that into towards on how I treat my profession and treat my patients in a more open-minded view. Um, I think at the beginning of the 20th century, when medicine in general, and particularly dentistry as well, became technological based, and there was a shift away from the humanities and education, medical and dental education. Now, 100 years removed, um, we are now, I feel, not enough involved in teaching the humanities in medical and dental education. I think that's a detriment to our profession personally. And I feel like the collecting of dental books and immersing myself in the history of my field through the books gives me not only a perceptual um, um, respect for my profession, but it's also a tangible. When I'm holding books that have been held by dentists and doctors 300, 400 years ago, it it takes me to the past. And maybe I'm being a hopeless romantic here, but as a book collector, is it possible not to be? I think many dentists and doctors in general lose something when they don't have that chance to experience that.
Yeah, no, certainly I would imagine, of course, over the centuries, one of the most common pains, of course, people don't get are toothaches, and there certainly is an element of humanitarianism relieving that pain. I'm not saying today, like you say, not everybody sits back in the chair and looks at their dentist like their Mother Teresa, but there is a there is a long history, of general medical practice with humanitarian cross currents, to certainly exploring that. So I come into your clinic as a patient. What do I see on the walls, Hisham?
Well, I mean, the clinics that I currently work in and manage, it's predominantly younger families, children. So um, basically posters of Shrek and and reruns of Shrek 1, 2, 3, 4 on the television screen. So
So
that's
we don't have woodcuts of Marcellus and Ambrose Parry yet in the
no, nothing like that. Unfortunately, that would be too long of a conversation during examination. I don't have that much time.
Now, I'm curious about something. As a young collector, generations ago, people would collect books because they loved them. There was not necessarily the sometimes appreciation as a financial asset, that's grown in importance. I think because the price of books themselves has gone up considerably in the last 20 years. So, people want to collect, but they don't want to, throw their money on an asset that is going to be worthless in the future. So, how does that figure in the mind of somebody like you when you're collecting?
Um, just like any subfield of book collecting, it's not about how expensive a book is. It's not, and of course you well aware of this. It's a matter of its worth to institutional knowledge and research. For example, you can easily anybody on any type of budget can easily get into the subgenre of modern dentistry, which is, for example, genetic engineering and biomedical engineering in terms of stem cell growth and dentogenesis, growing teeth from stem cells. The history of implantology, for example, that's recent, it's modern, and Darwin, of course, wants to get on the interview here.
That's okay. They're always welcome. You can't avoid books and cats. They're inextricably tied. So now you said you're studying for your master's at Hopkins in the history of medicine. So that's an obvious outgrowth of your collecting, I'm assuming, right? That was not in your plan originally.
So, I mean, my I guess from a personal knowledge, um, um, kind of a craving, I've always wanted to have a PhD. At first, I thought about maybe getting to the biotechnology sort of end of things, biomedical engineering, doing a PhD in that. But I wanted something to supplement that more of a humanities side of things. So um, part of collecting is, as you know, it's about knowledge. You have to research, you have to learn, you have to dive into that world. And so when the opportunity came that I would run across um, the remote program in Johns Hopkins for the history of medicine, it was something that I thought, okay, this is perfect. This is exactly what I needed to kind of supplement my day-to-day technical work as a dentist. So it was really the books that led me to that study, um, instead of vice versa.
I also notice on Instagram you have some of the most diverse and interesting general reading that I've seen in a long time, and you post with a nice cup of coffee each book: existentialism, philosophy. Are there cross currents of that with your collecting and interest in the history of medicine?
Not necessarily the collecting part of it. I mean, my thesis is focused on the history of the discovery of anesthesia, surgical anesthesia in the mid 19th century, and I was diving into the perception of the surgical patient under anesthesia by the surgeons at the time. And my argument is that they were perceived as a sort of cadaver, a living cadaver. And when when it comes to perception, you're getting talking about psychology, you're talking about philosophy, perception, and so um, that I spend a lot of my waking dream time thinking about our existence. So existentialism is a natural offshoot of that.
Another thing I notice is you travel frequently, and you are always visiting libraries and have nice book-related photos on Instagram. One of the reasons I asked that is, years ago I used to study Argentinian tango, and you would travel abroad and you'd go to various milongas and parties, and you would meet people who were in a community who had your interests, and within a minute you would have close friends in whatever city you've been in. As a book collector, when you go around the world looking at bookshops and libraries, is there that same type of rich community you immediately bond with?
Oh, absolutely. I think Instagram has been a great venue for networking in the book world. The history of our hobby has been more considered an introverted hobby, which is you in your own room in your own library with your books. And I think what Instagram has allowed people like yourself and myself is to kind of promote our passion and our hobby. And by virtue of that, you network with librarians, with book dealers, with auction, book department specialists, and that's how we met through that venue. And whenever I do travel, I reach out ahead of time. I reach out to curators, librarians, book dealers, and we have a rapport ahead of time, and it helps to when you go there that you kind of have almost a sense of familiarity already with them before meeting them, and it's instant connection, of course, when you have these discussions. So absolutely, Instagram has been a great venue for, I think, the resurgence of book collecting amongst the younger generation. Um, I feel.
So you want to show us one or two of your treasures from the library there?
Sure. At least personal favorites of mine. I mean, there's lots here, but I picked out a few. One for me is, of course, the French military surgeon, Ambroise Paré, which is in the 16th century. And he's not technically considered a dentist per se. Of course, dentistry was not a standalone profession at the time. Many of the dental books that were written back then were by general surgeons or physicians. But a couple of his books, of course, is his oeuvre of surgical compilations. And these two early editions of mine, one of my favorites because they are still in their contemporary bindings. And I'm not sure how much detail you can get in that camera, but this is a German edition of 16, I think it's 1600, 1601. And this is what I like about this is that it shows the original, very highly intricate line tooling on the cover with the original clasps, and it also includes a lot of the illustrations of one of the earliest dental prostheses for missing teeth and dental surgical equipment. And this one here is, it's a binding of 1592, is the 1589 or 88 edition, um, with the initials of the binder or the collector ZPD, which I still haven't been able to find who this person is. But this is as well Alam Todd overboards as well, and very intricately and beautifully blind too. So these are one of the heavier, larger volumes that I possess that I'm actually
Yeah, it's nice that you mentioned, for instance, those initials on the binding, because that's one of the pleasures of collecting books. For every individual copy, there's something unique and worthy of research. And it's interesting to know who would probably a doctor or a nobleman who would have owned that particular, copy. Of course, he was connected to the French king. And whenever I think of Paré, though, I tend to think of cauterization of wounds and everything in surgery. I think he was pretty early on in that, or not the first. Can we see like a woodcut or something in there?
Sure, yeah.
You can pick something random. You don't have to pull out necessarily the dental one. I know it's filled with illustrations.
One of the intricate things that I like about him is that he, at the end of most of his books, which was actually popular at the time to sell, which is the exploration of new worlds and the collecting of quote unquote monsters of the natural world. And so most of his books included woodcuts of fantastical creatures that the explorers apparently ran across. And these will be included at the end of such monsters as dragons, and I'm not sure if you can actually see this pretty well.
Yeah, well, one thing you can do, so I can, maybe if you send me a photo, I'll put it into the video. So
yeah, I think that'll be great.
Yeah. So you have another book that you can show us there?
Yeah, I do have. Joseph Lemaire was a dentist in the early 19th century, and one of his books was the Dentiste des Dames, which is the women's dentist. He did it in a way where he published a book for dental hygiene specifically to women, done in poetic forms, and one of the things that is interesting is that he did it in a way that's a little bit more indulgent and dramatic, and what some have criticized as sexist. But at the end of the day, we don't want to judge history with modern eyes. His view was more him trying to cater to royal families, and he was a diplomat as well. And so he would specially bind his books and send them off to women of loyalty at the time. And one of the greatest examples is this little edition right here with the monograms ML, which is Marie Louise, which is Napoleon's second wife. And this comes from her personal library. And here he specially bound it and presented it to her in essence to, of course, to curry favors from Napoleon's government. And so this was a great one. And then another one he specially bound with the emblem of the Princess Ekaterina, which she was the Princess of Russia at the time, and this was specially gifted to her. So as you see, there's a lot more to dentistry than just pulling teeth. There's also the angle of the contextual role in history. So there's a lot of examples of these royal dentists and grand dentists in Italy and France and Belgium that would cater to royal families and they wanted to be known and promote themselves as the royal dentist to the king or queen or princess or prince, and so that they can promote their services to everybody else.
Like the stylists to the Hollywood stars, right? The dentists.
Exactly, extreme makeover dentist. Exactly.
Yeah, well, they were just 150 years shy of YouTube, but otherwise, yeah. But those are two very interesting books with a really fantastic provenance.
Absolutely, very interesting.
Of course. So a couple things. My favorite: how has tooth extraction improved over the years? Is it any better than 20 years ago? That's the simplest one, right?
It's funny you mention that because I do dive a lot into the perception of pain, and so I would say this from a technical perspective, it's improved by the fact that there's no pain,
Gotcha.
but yet somehow patients perceive pain. So it's improved plenty. Instead of extracting the tooth with a piece of the jaw with it, we just extract the tooth these days.
Yeah, that's no, but actually, pain management really started in dentistry. I mean, when you think about how important that is, to the entire field of medicine and suffering, it's pretty astounding. It started in,
And this is one of the reasons why I focused my master's thesis on the discovery of surgical anesthesia. It was discovered, as you know, by a dentist, and it's not a surprise. I mean, the the, the pain and the worry and the fear of dentistry was really related to dental pain. And it was at the crossroads of humanitarianism in medicine, which is alleviation of pain, and dentistry. So yeah, dentistry is absolutely tied to suffering and the lack of and the removal of suffering in medicine.
well, one final question for you, Hisham. Are you at all concerned now that you've explained your collecting focus with such passion and love that there is going to be a new mass of collectors that are going after every dental book as soon as this is posted? Heavy competition going forward?
I don't know why I feel like maybe I don't have anything to worry about, but uh, but if they do, please. I mean, I would love to talk to another collector in my field. I have I guess colleagues in that field. So yeah, please, I would love to be
I'm
connected.
definitely going to encourage if anybody has any dental, specific rare dental books to reach out to you directly. So you are a champion of the field in that. So, well, again, Hisham, thank you so much. I really enjoyed the interview, and I'm sure, like I said, you're going to be an inspiration to many collectors because you really started with, as you said, a box of some 19th century books, and it's grown into quite a remarkable collection and keeps growing. So, thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity to share my passion, as always.